Hello and welcome back to World of Warships with Sorvesteon. In this video, we will be analyzing and comparing the battleships from Tier 6. Those being the New Mexico, the Warspite, and the Fuso. Again, just like in my last video featuring the Tier 4 battleships, all the ships we'll be looking at in this video have been fully upgraded. So first up on our menu is the New Mexico. The New Mexico is a really great ship. Well, that's not to say that the other two are not just as great. They are all great, but with different strengths and different weaknesses. You know, it really bugs me how some players label ships as good or bad, simply on how intuitive they find them to play, without really taking the time to understand each different ship and understand how their own playstyle needs to change in order to bring out their ship's strengths. But I digress. The New Mexico, like her predecessors, offers a balanced blend of firepower and protection. However, unlike her predecessors, it is the first American battleship in World of Warships to use the American all-or-nothing armor scheme, which has a wide range of ramifications. So let's take a closer look at her survivability. The New Mexico has the lowest HP out of all the Tier 6 battleships, but her Citadel armor is second to none. Now, I'm using the term Citadel armor here because one big consequence of the all-or-nothing armor scheme is the noticeable lack of armor anywhere else but the Citadel, and that includes the turrets. Which means that unlike previous American battleships that had armored turrets, the New Mexico's guns can become incapacitated or destroyed quite easily. This also means that while the Citadel is quite well protected, and she has good torpedo bulges, the New Mexico tends to bleed HP from being hit in other places, like her front and aft ends and her superstructure that really have no armor at all. And that's where you get into another problem with the New Mexico. Because at Tier 6, where you have ships like the Cleveland and the Nuremberg, and sometimes even the Atlanta and the Mikhail Kutuzov, HE damage and fires become the Achilles heel of the New Mexico. Because those ships have very high rates of fire, and will just spam HE like nobody's business. And the New Mexico is not armored in all the places she's getting hit with HE fire, meaning that the damage from the HE shells is hardly being mitigated. And she has less HP to withstand the damage over time from fires. And that leads us to yet another problem with the New Mexico. You can immediately see the difference between the amount of HP each ship's repair party consumable restores per second. And that's where the New Mexico really suffers, because she can't recover as much HP from her repair party consumable as her counterparts can. So one thing to be cautious of in the New Mexico is how quickly your HP gets whittled down. Because if you lose your HP too quickly, you won't be able to get as much of it back as the other Tier 6 battleships are able to. Now, despite all these problems, the New Mexico is still very tough, and is more resilient to Citadel penetrations than other Tier 6 battleships are, especially if you angle her armor at incoming fire. In this clip, I've got two Fusos on my left, a New Mexico in front, along with a Cleveland and a Königsberg. As you can see, by pointing the ship at the enemy New Mexico and angling the ship towards the Fusos, I'm presenting a really small profile. But more importantly, I'm making sure that I don't present a flat broadside to any of these ships. Because I know that as soon as I do, I will take some serious damage. But I'm still broadside enough that I can still fire all my guns at that Fuso, so I'm not losing out on any of my firepower. In this engagement, the biggest threat here is actually the Cleveland, which is firing HE and setting me on fire, because there's just nothing I can do to mitigate that damage, except use my damage control party and repair party consumables. And as you can see, I'm using the upgraded versions of these consumables, and that's really helping me deal with this fire damage. Now, I'm finally able to get rid of that New Mexico in front of me. And shortly afterwards, the Cleveland eats a whole bunch of torpedoes and dies, saving me from his relentless HE spam. But now I'm kind of in a pickle, because I've got enemy torpedo bombers coming in, The Fuso has turned to engage me at point blank range where I won't be able to stay angled. And I've got a Koenigsberg armed with torpedoes on my right. And I end up eating a whole bunch of torpedoes myself. But like I mentioned earlier, the armor belt on the New Mexico is really good. And even though I took 5 torpedoes, my armor belt mitigated a lot of the damage, allowing me to survive that attack. Now, angling the New Mexico is a bit of an art because it has pretty much no bow armor. And as you just saw, I just took a big hit from that Nagato on my bow and lost a good chunk of my HP. And again, I took another big hit on my bow. But this time, he got one of my forward turrets as well. So when it comes to angling the New Mexico, you want to use that Citadel armor. So I recommend angling to the side a bit more and not facing your enemies head on. Now let's take a look at the New Mexico's guns. She gets 12 very average 356mm guns, horrible HE shells, and decent AP shells. One of the downsides with her guns is the reload time, which is the worst out of the Tier 6 battleships, so this puts her on the low end of the DPM spectrum. Her turret rotation isn't anything to write home about either. While it's not as slow as the Warspites, even with commander skills you can see that it's still pretty painful, and switching sides will definitely be a chore. Now I recalculated the maximum dispersion for all the ships to find out what their dispersion is at the same range, using the Warspite's maximum range as a baseline, since it's the shortest. As you can see, the New Mexico has by far the worst dispersion, but this is partly due to the gun upgrade options available on the different ships. Here you can see that the New Mexico is the only Tier 6 battleship that does not have access to the Gunfire Control System Modification 1, and instead gets the Artillery Plotting Room Modification 1, which, considering its maximum range is only 14.9 kilometers without the modification, I think the Artillery Plotting Room Modification 1 upgrade is very necessary to give this ship a competitive maximum firing range of 17.3 kilometers. And since the New Mexico gets a spotting aircraft consumable, that range can be temporarily extended to 20.8 kilometers. Now, that horrible dispersion is going to mean that you're not going to land as many hits compared to the Fuso, and that's why the New Mexico also has 12 guns. Firing more shells per salvo helps make up for her terrible dispersion, and overall, I find she gets just about as many Citadel penetrations as the Warspite does. Complementing the New Mexico's main guns is a very decent secondary armament. 8 of her secondary guns also function as dual-purpose AA guns. And AA defense is where the real forte of the New Mexico lies, as it has the best AA defense out of all the Tier 6 battleships, which she will use to punish any carriers that try to torp or bomb her. Now, I have basic firing training and advanced firing training on all my mid and higher tier battleships, because carriers just keep getting more and more lethal as you go up the tiers. Ideally, you'd always want 1 or 2 cruisers escorting you, but in reality, you can't always depend on having cruiser AA to shield you, especially in a ship as slow as the New Mexico, that tends to fall behind the cruiser pack. And to be honest, even cruiser AA sometimes just isn't enough by itself. You can see that I've already shot down 10 planes, and I completely annihilate this bomber squadron, for a grand total of 13 planes shot down in one battle, which is really good for a Tier 6 battleship. The New Mexico is slow. Don't kid yourself by thinking you're going to be leading the charge in this ship. But what she lacks in speed, she more than makes up for in turning ability. The New Mexico is the most responsive battleship out of her counterparts, and she won't disappoint you when you need to change direction fast. As for her concealment, it's typical of a battleship, and very average, which suffice it to say means that you're not going to be invisi firing or sneaking up on anyone. My verdict for the New Mexico is that she is a well-balanced juggernaut. Next up, we have the Warspite, which is also a very good ship, and it shares some similarities with the New Mexico, but there are also some very important key differences that make the Warspite a unique Tier 6 battleship. The first important key difference is that unlike the New Mexico, which uses the all or nothing armor scheme, the Warspite features a more balanced approach, with slightly thinner armor around the citadel, but thicker armor covering more of the rest of the ship, including the turrets. This means that no matter what angle you fire at her from, she is one tough nut to crack. On top of that, she also gets the best self-heal out of all the Tier 6 battleships, which gives her great longevity on the battlefield. I wanted to show you this clip to give you a better idea of just how tough this ship is, and I've sped it up to save some time. You can see that the Warspite is leading the charge and soaking up all the incoming fire like a shield for her allies. Now, an important thing you should notice in this clip is that I tried to avoid showing the side of my ship to the enemy, and one of the times that I did, like to that New Mexico, I took a lot of damage. Unlike the New Mexico, the Warspite doesn't have the same gap in her armor at her bow and her stern, so she can quite happily keep her bow to the enemy and sail merrily along while deflecting most incoming AP shells. HE spam and fires are also a major concern for the Warspite, but like I mentioned before, the repair party consumable on the Warspite is much better than the one on the New Mexico, so the Warspite can recover a lot more of her HP. And because she has a more balanced armor scheme, she also takes less damage from HE shells. But you can also see from this clip that the Warspite isn't just good at defense. She packs some serious firepower too, which come in the form of her 8 381mm guns. Despite having less guns than the New Mexico, by no means does she fall behind in damage per minute. This comes from having a slightly faster rate of fire, much better shells, and if you're using the Gunfire Control System Modification 1 upgrade, much better accuracy. Now, of course, there has to be something to offset such awesome guns, and that's that they have a much slower rotation speed, and they have a shorter maximum firing range than those on the New Mexico, when it's using the Artillery Plotting Room Modification 1 upgrade. So Sorvesteon, why don't you use the main battery modification 2 upgrade to improve the speed of the turret rotation? There are two reasons why I don't. One, because the main battery modification 2 upgrade also increases the reload time of the main guns by 10%. And two, because like we see here, I can simply turn the ship to get the guns pointed in the right direction faster. And in fact, that's exactly what you're supposed to do in this ship. There is also one other way the Warspite doesn't fall behind in damage per minute. Remember when I talked about the New Mexico's guns? I said that the New Mexico gets about the same number of citadels as the Warspite. Now the Warspite achieves this despite having less guns through a combination of better accuracy, faster reload time, and having 381mm guns, which have a better chance to penetrate cruiser and battleship armor of this tier. However, because the Warspite has less guns and better accuracy, the player also needs to be a bit better at aiming in order for her better accuracy to actually translate to citadel penetrations. And just like the New Mexico, the Warspite also gets the spotting aircraft consumable to temporarily extend her maximum firing range out to 19.5 kilometers. The Warspite has fewer secondary guns than the New Mexico does, but don't let that fool you, because the Warspite secondary guns have a longer range. And while not quite as good as the New Mexico in the AA department, the Warspite certainly has the ability to shred its fair share of aircraft. She's a bit faster than the New Mexico is, and she has the smallest turning circle radius of all the Tier 6 battleships. So she will certainly deliver when you need to make a sharp turn. But she's not quite as responsive as the New Mexico is. As for the Warspite's detectability, it's virtually the same as the New Mexico's. So my final verdict for the Warspite is that she is a hard-hitting Leviathan. The Fuso is all about pure, unadulterated firepower. It follows the typical Japanese naval doctrine of putting as many big guns on as possible. The Fuso, like the New Mexico and the Warspite, is a very good ship, but her playstyle is very different from the other two. She doesn't like to get up close and personal, but rather likes to hang back and shower her enemies with numerous shells. The Fuso has by far the most HP, and with a distributed armor scheme and a pretty good self-heal, she is much better at enduring HE spam and fires than her counterparts are. but all this is negated by the really crappy armor she sports. Her Citadel armor is the weakest out of all the Tier 6 battleships, and it is unlikely to protect her from any other battleships of equal or higher tier. Further compounding this problem is the fact that she has much weaker deck armor than her counterparts, and so she is especially vulnerable to plunging fire, which, considering she is a standoffish attacker, can be a serious problem. Her turret armor is the strongest out of all the Tier 6 battleships though, so have fun trying to knock out her guns. Well, at least she'll almost always be able to keep using them, regardless of what kind of beating she takes, unlike the New Mexico. So, to illustrate the weakness of her armor, I thought I'd show you the dumbest thing you can do in a Fuso. Now, first off, going down a really narrow straight with potential enemies at the other end is one of the dumbest things you can do in a battleship, period. Because in this narrow area, there is just no room to maneuver. It's almost impossible to not end up exposing the side of your ship to the enemy. Now, the Fuso doesn't exactly have the strongest armor, so getting up close and personal with other battleships like this usually doesn't end well for the Fuso. And as you can see, it didn't really end well for me either. The Fuso basically relies on 4 things to survive. The first is simply showering her targets with shells from beyond their maximum firing range, so that they cannot return fire. The second is her speed to throw off the aim of other players. The third is the dispersion of incoming shells, causing many of them to simply miss at the ranges the Fuso can engage from. And lastly, being angled to deflect the incoming shells that don't miss. However, angling the Fuso sharply towards the enemy to deflect incoming shells really diminishes her firepower because of the arrangement of her turrets. Her design pretty much necessitates that she broadsides. And even though she can keep somewhat of an angle, it still means having to expose her vulnerable citadel to incoming shells. The Fuso has 12 very good guns arranged across 6 turrets. She has the highest rate of fire, and her turrets rotate the fastest out of all the Tier 6 battleships. One massive advantage that the Fuso has over her counterparts is her crazy accurate guns. From my calculations, you can see that there is just a world of difference between the accuracy of her guns and the accuracy of the New Mexico's and the Warspite's guns. And this dramatically increases her chance of getting citadel penetrations when she fights at ranges similar to those of her counterparts. Of course, this gives her the option of sitting really far back from the front line and lobbing shells at her enemies while still enjoying the same dispersion they get. So how close she wants to get to danger will have a big impact on how much damage she is able to inflict. And of course, she gets the spotting aircraft consumable, and has the option to temporarily go full sniper with a maximum firing range of 26.1 kilometers. With that kind of range, you'll never have to wait to get into the action. You'll only have to wait for someone else to spot targets for you. While her maximum AP shell damage is far from the best out of the Tier 6 battleships, with her crazy accuracy, the AP shell damage will add up through multiple hits and/or penetrations. Now, the Fuso might sound really overpowered with that kind of firepower and flexibility, but you gotta remember that there are usually other Fusos or other higher tier battleships that have just as much range as she does. And you need to remember just how weak her armor is, especially to plunging fire. And then we come back to the reality that while she plays differently, she's no better or worse than her other 2 Tier 6 counterparts. When it comes to secondary armament, the Fuso is on par with the New Mexico. But as far as her AA defense is concerned, the Fuso is really nothing special. And while she is the speed demon of the Tier 6 battleships, she sucks at turning. And she has really bad concealment. So for me, the verdict is that she is a standoffish artillery support sniper. Okay, it's done. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Tier 6 battleships and how they compare against each other. And I hope you subscribe to my channel for more videos like this about World of Warships. Until next time, take care and happy sailing.